Hey guys, what's going on? It's Kyger1324 up here today with something, well, a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about sports games today. Yes, sports games. Something that, for me personally, I don't really have much interest in sports games, but as a collector, I have a ton of sports games. So I'm going to talk about some of these games. I'm going to talk about just what is the obsession with sports games and so on. Now, see, sports games have been around since the beginning. Heck, the first video game ever created on an old NASA computer was called Tennis for Two. Yeah, it was a tennis game. And even the Pong games were actually, when you had the consoles, were actually called tennis, hockey, squash, and so on. So, you know, sports games have been around since the beginning, really. The Atari 2600 had a ton of sports games, and all these classic consoles, up until today's modern consoles. Sports games have been around for a long time, and you know what? They're not going away. So, what is it that attracts them? Why are there so many sports games? What is the difference between them? Well, unless you play them, you're not going to really notice the difference, apart from graphics, really, over time. Now, for someone like me, a collector's point of view, sports games don't have much value, but we'll talk more about the collector's part at the end. So, for me, as a kid growing up, I grew up with video games that took place in fantasy realms. Things that you couldn't necessarily do in real life. You can go out and play these sports or train to be one of these sportsmen in the real world. It's possible. Maybe not for someone like me, but it is possible. Or you can watch it on the TV. I mean, people go crazy over football over here. And I'm on about football with the actual feet. Not the American football and all this. But there's tons of sports out there. And no matter how obscure a sport, it seems like it got some form of video game release. And I have some few obscure ones here. Bear in mind, this is only a small snippet of the amount of sports games that I have. Now, bear in mind, the PlayStation 2 is, again, in my opinion, filled with sports games. In fact, 30% of the PS2 library is sports games, maybe even more. And why is that? Well, today I've got 3 different lineups up to console. I've got a bunch of PS2 games and some older games, some portable sports games to talk about, and some modern ones. But I want to just get something out of the way first. A few games that some people might class as sports games, but in my opinion, I don't particularly class them as sports games. We have motor racing games, like the Formula 1 games. Here's one on PS1, Formula 1 2000. I remember having this one as a kid, and you know, I don't really class racing games like Formula 1, even though it's classed as motorsport. I wouldn't call them a sports game, I call them a racing game. So I'm not going to talk about any more racing games in this video. But just putting it out there, there are a shit ton of Formula 1 games out there, and a shit ton of other games like rally games and things like that. But there was also a bunch of other sort of extreme sports games. Now, extreme sports such as skateboarding. Again, skateboarding is classed as a sport in some people's eyes. Some people wouldn't really call it a sport. Tony Hawk Pro Skater was one of the most famous skateboarding games of all time. And number 4 is actually my favourite. That's why I took it out. I don't know if this would be classed as a sports game. I would just call it a skateboarding game, but it can be classed as a sports game. I like these sort of games because they're not necessarily based on like a ball sport or anything like that. It is based on tricks, and the games are pretty fun. In fact, you can do a lot of things in this game that, like I said, you couldn't do in real life. Yeah, you can go out and become a pro skater, just like Tony Hawk. But it takes a lot of time, and to become an expert at the game, it doesn't take as much time. But yeah, got to have the things, and I've got a shit ton of skateboarding games. On the other hand, we had snowboarding games. One of the most famous snowboarding games is SSX. But this game, again, some people wouldn't class it as a sports game because it plays more like a racing game. Now, there are other snowboarding games out there that do focus on more of a simulator style of game. And there's a bunch of them out there that are just based on tricks and all this stuff, like Amped, for example, on the Xbox consoles, and then we've got like the most modern skiing or snowboarding game, ice sport, snow sport, whatever you want to call it, is Steep. Now, are they classed as sports games? Well, it's down to you. SSX is a fantastic one. It's not a sports game in my opinion. This is more of an arcade racer in my opinion, but I just wanted to put it out there. I don't want to. I have missed a few sports, so ones that I have missed, I will mention a few things. And then we have some BMX games. Now there were a ton of BMX games. I've picked this one up because it's kind of an obscure game. It's called BMX Triple X, and it's an adult themed BMX game. It's pretty bad, I will say, but the whole concept of this game with half naked people and naked chicks in it made for a kind of a funny look. If you went and brought this game when you were a bit younger, or you asked your mum or dad to buy this game, you would get a funny look. But again, BMX games still existed, and we had ones like Matt Hoffman Pro BMX and things like that. So there were a bunch of them out there. But those are just some of the ones that are the more extreme sports that could be classed as a sports game, but don't really. But one of my oldest sports games that I have in my collection is on the Sega Mega Drive. Now this is a compilation. I picked this one up not too long ago, and it included EA's Hockey and John Madden Football. Yeah, this is the first Madden game. I have the first one here. Now, these sort of old sports games, again, like I said, you can find these dirt cheap. Now, you got to bear in mind, at the time, this would have been the best thing you could have got. If you were a fan of hockey or Madden and you got a game like this, you would have loved it. And to some extent, I do enjoy sports games that are retro, just because they're not necessarily realistic, and it's just based on a game really, and it's a fun little experience to play with some friends. And you know, the competitive side of you does come out when you play sports games, but the thing is, I do have a knack for when it comes to retro sports games. Games on the Sega Mega Drive or the Super Nintendo, something like that, pre-3D games, still hold up today, because even though the graphics may not be amazing and it still looks old and feels old, the gameplay is still fun. I mean, for a competitive game, I don't know how much time I spend playing one of these games today, but throw it in and get a friend round or something, probably can enjoy yourself really. And that's the thing with sports games, is it's really up to you. There are people out there that go out and buy every single new sports game that comes out and just focuses on playing on the story mode. Nowadays sports games are focusing more online, but back in the day there were people that do that. And like I said, but then there's people who go out and buy these games and go, you know what, let's actually play it online. But then we get on to the main feature really here today. We have a ton of sports games here I'm going to talk a little bit about. Now bear in mind, I haven't played most of these, so I'm not here to talk necessarily about the game, but just as in the sport in general. But we had action-themed sports games such as boxing games. Fight Night was one of the prime examples of a boxing game. Now, like I said, boxing games have been around since the Atari 2600, and they've only gotten better from what I know. I'm not a big fan of boxing in the real world. I have nothing against the sport, it's just I don't watch it particularly. But, you know, if you wanted to beat the hell out of someone with gloves on, you can do it with these games. And I think to this day they are still making boxing games, but they have sort of gone off the radar now. And it seems like more fighting sports are based on MMA or UFC nowadays rather than boxing. Will they make a new one? We'll see how things go. But yeah, I do remember playing a boxing game. Then we got another sort of obscure thing. Is it sport? Isn't it sport? Fishing. Are fishing games sport? I don't know really. I would just class them as fishing games, but when the hell am I going to talk more about this game? I really don't know. Again, this one's called Fisherman's Challenge by Konami. Yeah, Konami. It's hard to believe that they made masterpieces such as Contra and Metal Gear Solid. I'm sure Contra was a Konami game, I think it was. And now, then they made weird, obscure games like this. Now, Konami is no company to stray away from sports games. In fact, they still are making Pro Evolution Soccer to this day, with the new one on the way. But fishing games, are they sport? Are they not? Again, do I have interest in them? Not really. I really don't see the whole thing about fishing. But here's what makes this one a sport. It's about trying to get a championship. And if there's a championship involved, often it means it's a competitive sport. So, fishing games, I don't know, guys. But speaking of obscure extreme sports, sorry, I did miss this one. Pro Surfer. Is surfing a sport? Well, water sport, well, hey. But, you know, it seemed like the PlayStation 2 was prime with sports games. No matter how obscure the sport would be, it seemed like it got a video game released. Now, Kelly Slater, is he a professional surfer? Probably, I don't know. But I have no clue as to why they needed to make surf games. Now, there are more surfing games out there. I am aware that there were ones before this. But this is just one that I happen to have. Now, is it any good? I don't know. But we'll have to try it one day and see. I will try and play some sports games for you guys. I do want to actually say that I played every single game that I have at one point. Not complete every single game that I've got, because I'll be here forever. But yeah, so those are, and speaking of an obscure thing, AFL, yeah, Australian rules football. I have no clue on how this is played. It looks to me like a mix of rugby, football and American football, all combined into one. But it's just proof that the PlayStation 2 had to have a sports game, no matter how obscure. Again, this was more popular in Australia, and again, if you were in America or something, or Japan, you probably wouldn't have got this game. But because Australia's classed as a PAL territory, we've got some of the Australian games and vice versa. But just goes to show, guys, that no matter what sport, PlayStation 2 had it. So those are some of the more obscure sports. Now we get on to the sort of the main sports games we've got. Again, first up, we had some golf games. Now, there are a ton of golf games out there, and golf, whether you like it or not, I don't particularly like it. As for games, golf games could be considered playable and can be considered relaxing to some extent. In fact, the Wii is a great example of a console that had great golf games because of the motion controls. And again, sports games that you are on the Wii, for me personally, or something on the Kinect, it seems like a cool idea, because it actually gives you the impression that you're actually playing the sport. Again, golf games have been around for years, but we had like two prime examples of sort of what style of sports games we would have got. We would have got the traditional simulator sports games, the one that tried to be more like the real thing, like Tiger Woods PGA Tour. Again, they are still making PGA games to this day. I think Rory McIlroy was one of the last ones that I've seen, but there are still a bunch more coming out. Again, if you're a fan of these games, let me know in the comments below. Are they worth playing? And then you had some more cartoony, arcadey style ones, like Everybody's Golf. This was one of Sony's sort of own branded golf game, and these games are considered to be highly sought after and highly playable to fans of golf and fans of just playing a game, because they don't take themselves too seriously. And there are mini golf games out there. In fact, there's so many mini golf games out there on PC to this day. And then in here we had some NHL games. So for example, here's another prime example of two different NHL games, and of course National Hockey League, very popular sport in Canada and in America. Ice hockey is a pretty cool sport, I will say. There's a lot of violence in it. It's one of them rough sports, I will say. But again, NHL is still going to this day with the new one on the way. We have the traditional EA sort of normal simulator one. Tries to be like the real thing. This is 2005 here. Again, I have a ton of these games. These are just ones that I picked up just so I can try and do a bit of an overview. And then we have the hits game. Now these ones focus more on sort of like 3-on-3 and action and arcades and power-ups. I like these sort of things because it doesn't try to be realistic. It just tries to be fun. And I like sports games that do that. Now, another prime example is like the Mario Strikers games and the Mario sports games. Those are really sort of fun, action, arcadey style gameplay rather than realistic. Speaking of tennis, we have here a one called Centre Court Hard Hitter. How good this is, I don't know, but there are a ton of tennis games out there. I've already told you guys how tennis was one of the first sports to really become on a console. It wasn't football, it was actually tennis. Like I said, Pong was tennis. And the thing is, tennis games, again, to some extent, can be fun. I don't follow tennis, but it is quite popular here in the UK. But there are a ton of tennis games out there. Excuse me. And now we get to, we have here a ton of football games. Now, football games, when I say football, soccer for you guys in America or Japan. Now we have, the thing is with football games is, football is one of them sports that I don't really care too much about. But the PlayStation 2 was a prime example of how many different versions of football games you could have had. Of course, you had the traditional FIFA and Pro Evolution Soccer games. Now, these are the two ones that you'll find in today's modern society. It will either be Pro Evolution Soccer or FIFA. Now, again, it's really down to personal preference which one you prefer. FIFA, again, has more of the more teams and all this because it's got more rights to the teams and stuff like that, being, you know, FIFA and all. And then Pro Evolution Soccer had to go around that some way and had some more issues with licensing. But again, again, unless you actually play the game side by side, you're not going to notice much of a difference, in my opinion. But there are people out there that do notice the difference, and these two competitors are still going to this day. And it just goes to show that with all these other sports football games that have come out, these two are the ones that are left standing. And it just goes to show that eventually other companies give up and go, you know what, let these two battle it out, because they'll be battling it out to the end while other companies decide to go off onto things. And then we have here some sort of different sports games here. Here's one of my favourite sports games of all time, FIFA Street 2. This was absolutely fantastic. I haven't played the first one, but it's probably as good. This game focused more on a street thing. Now, there's a ton of street games. There's NBA Street, there's NHL Street, there's NFL Street, there's, you know, everything Street. These ones focused on not being based around winning championships and being the best team in the world. It just focused on just people playing football, and you can do really cool tricks in these games. You can do customization. I really enjoyed FIFA Street 2, and it'd be I will say this, EA, if you're listening, I doubt you are, but if you are, bring back FIFA Street. Make FIFA Street 4, because there weren't necessarily a fourth one. It was just called FIFA Street. And then here's a fine example of some competitor sports games. We have here England international football. Again, it seemed like every single company wanted to get involved on making something. And now, who made this one? Codemasters, yeah. So Codemasters threw their hat their name in the hat and decided to make a football game themselves. This was England international football, yeah. So if you want a game where you play as England, this game's for you. Now, here's another example of, again, like international football, it was Codemasters games, the club football. Now, I don't support any particular team. This is just one that I picked up. I do have a few more of these club football games. These are all particularly the same game, just with a different team that you play as in the story mode. That's it. They're the same. And there's about 40 of these on PS2. No word of a lie. And there's also 2003 version and 2005 versions as well. It's crazy that how many of these were made, and it's all the same game. Like, it's just crazy. But it just goes to show that at the time there were more than just FIFA and PES. So if you didn't want FIFA or PES, you had the opportunity to get that. And even Sega threw their hat in the name in the hat with Virtual Pro Football. Of course, Virtua is one of their brand games, Virtua Fighter, Virtua Tennis and all this shit. So they made a football game. How good it is, I don't know. I am aware that there's also games like This Is Football. I do have that. And also before Pro Evolution Soccer, there was ISS Soccer, International Superstar Soccer. And there's probably a bunch more out there, like the Junior League football games and all this stuff. But yeah. And then here's for those of you who didn't want to actually play as the footballers, you had the LMA Manager games. Yeah, but there was a bunch of these management games where you would actually play as the manager, and you'd have to manage everything from your team's formation to your crowds to your stadiums and stuff like this. Now, that's kind of cool and all, but these sort of games were for hardcore people who knew how the strategy worked in football. So if you don't know nothing about football, you're probably not going to get on with these games too well. But they're just some of the PS2 ones that I have. But now there's a bunch more that I do have. There was bowling games, yeah, bowling. There's freaking like I said, you've got golf, you've got football, you've got American football with Madden, you've got NHL, you've got NBA, you've got so many different versions of NBA, it's unbelievable. And why are there so many different versions? Are they just trying to milk the sport for what it's worth and know that they're going to get a shit ton of money for it? Or do they really think that these games, people really have a dying need for these games? Some people do. But then we had some, talking about main consoles, we had here some games on the go. So yeah, these are just some of the ones that I happen to have. We got PES 2008, Virtua Tennis World Tour, and World Snooker Championship 2007 and 8. There's another one that's crossed off the list, snooker. I do like playing pool and snooker. As for the video games, they're alright, but again, I'd prefer much to play the real thing. But it just goes to show that portable consoles had sports games on them as well. Now, if you're someone that loves sports games and you wanted to go, you were going out or, you know, going on a journey and you wanted to take your sports games on the go, but you had to sacrifice some of the graphics and stuff, you know, you could probably have some fun with these. But again, it just goes to show that no matter what console, whether it was a home console, PC, or a handheld, it had sports games on it. But now we get into the modern stuff. Now, these are some of the modern sports games. Now, these are all Xbox One stuff. So, like I said, FIFA is still going to this day. This is 15. I do have 14, 15, 16, and 17 with 19 on the way. I'm not interested in FIFA whatsoever. But again, you know, for a full set, you need to have them. It just goes to show how many... to this day, FIFA is still going, and it's just not going anywhere. Again, the games have improved with graphics and updates and all this stuff, but is it really worth having to pay 50, 60 quid every year they bring one out? I don't know, but like I said, it's only FIFA or PES now, so yeah. Madden, yeah, so Madden games, there are so many Madden games. Here's one I happen to have, a Madden 25. This was 2014, kind of a 25-year anniversary of Madden. There are so many Madden games out there, guys. And again, American football, I don't know a lot of. With games like this, you need to know the sport a little bit before playing it. Whereas with, say, the older ones, you don't necessarily need that. So if someone goes to me, I've got 2 sports games here. I've got Madden on the Xbox or Madden on the Sega. Which one do you want to play? I'm going to go with the Sega one just because this one is, again, a little bit too realistic for me. A little bit like watching the sport again. But for some people, they love Madden with 19 just been released. Like I said, with Madden, you've had basketball games. Basketball, again, NBA games, NBA Live, NBA NBA 2K, NBA Jam, NBA Ballers, NBA 3-on-3, NBA Street Hoops, Street Hoops number 4. Fucking how many NBA games do you need? How many times can they rehash basketball? I know that they change it up, and with the new NBA you can play as females and you can, you know, play in the streets and stuff like that before going on to the big league. But it's basketball. How many times can you rehash it? Yeah, updated roster and all this stuff. Maybe better controls and stuff like that. But it's still basketball. Again, do I enjoy basketball games? I don't mind playing a sports game as a competitive thing against my friend every once in a while. But do I put time and effort into these games? Well, maybe. I give them a go one day, try them out, see if I can get into them. I know there have been times where I've played a certain sports game and I've gone, well, for example, I played a hockey game on PS3. I can't remember which one it was, and I really enjoyed it. But then when I tried to play a more modernised version, it had all these strategy elements in it. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And then we go on to the, again, some more action sports. We have the UFC and wrestling. This is 16 and this is UFC 1. Again, I don't really consider these sports games. Again, wrestling, whether you want to call it a sport or not, it's down to you. I say it's entertainment more than it is sport. But nonetheless, these games, again, still coming out every year. UFC 3 with the latest one. WWE 19 on the way. I get the sports game. If everyone says they get a sports one sports game every year, for me it's the wrestling games. These are my sports games. These are the ones that I enjoy. Now the thing is, with sports games, a lot of people need to realise what the down thing about sports games. Because there's so many sports games, it means if you're going for a full set, your collection will be cluttered up with sports games. Now, some people don't buy sports games because, like I said, it clutters up the collection. For me, being the collector that I am, I like to have a bit of everything. So I do like to have the sports games, and I know these games have some value for people. You've got to bear in mind, at one point these games were being sold for 40, 60, 50, 70, 80, 100, whatever, pounds. And now they're being sold for 50p, a pound. 5p I picked up FIFA 2004 for. You know, it just goes to show how many... It just goes to show how the mighty has fallen. And is it because the newer version is better? Or what? Now, I know there's people out there that will go, well, some of the older ones are actually better than the newer ones. It's really down to personal preference. But as a collector, I do like the fact that sports games get dirt cheap, because it means that I'm able to boost up my collection, even if they are sports games, quite easily and cheaply. Now, the thing is with sports games, I find, is that even though you see them dirt cheap, sometimes it's hard to pick them up, because you go to yourself, that's another sports game I've got. Is it any different to the other ones that I have? The answer is yes, obviously, but as a collector, it makes it hard for someone who don't really particularly buy sports games. Day one kind of thing, waits maybe a year or so to get the sports game. Is it that perfect? Is it that worth it? I don't know. But the thing is, I actually enjoy having sports games in my collection for two reasons. One, they're dirt cheap, and two, not many people, when people come round and they see all the games, they just expect, you know, action, adventure and all these things. And then when they see all the sports games, they go, wow, you actually brought the sports game. People say things like, this is worthless. You know, these are worthless. But for me, I don't think so. You got to bear in mind, at one point these games brought joy and happiness to people, and people brought these games day one and fell in love with it. And it was only because the new ones were released that they sort of gave up on the last one, because everyone else had moved on to the new one. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that there aren't people out there that still don't play FIFA 15, but it seems to this day that no matter what we say, sports games will always be around. But nonetheless, sports games for me, they have a place in my collection, even though I may not have had them as a kid, or I may not have played them before. It's nice knowing that I can go back and experience what someone else might have experienced when they got them day one. You know, like I said, LMA Manager was 50p. Someone probably brought this game on day one, played it, loved it, and then got rid of it because the new one came out. It got forgotten about, put on the shelf, everyone gave it a go, and I feel like I'm adopting a bastard child almost. But nonetheless, I really do think that sports games have some value. Maybe not necessarily in terms of money, but in terms of love and nostalgia for some people. Fact is, you know, like I said with the WWE game, at one point I played this and I fell in love with it. And then it gets forgotten about. It's sad to think that these games were once loved and then they've just been forgotten about. But nonetheless, do we really need more sports games? No. The answer is no. But at the same time, there are people out there that love sports games, and if you're one of them, that's great. Let me know in the comments, what sports games do you particularly like? Are there any particular sports games do you think would you like to see a comeback? Because there are games, like I said, like NHL hits and stuff like that have gone off the radar, and it seems like more and more companies are just trying to focus on having less sports games, because I think they know that after a while no one's going to give a crap about them. So just releasing one a year, that's fine by me, because it means that come next year I can get the game dirt cheap and I don't have to worry about cluttering up more and more sports games. But nonetheless, I wanted to do a little dedicated video on some of the sports games that I have. Like I said, I don't particularly enjoy sports games, but there are a certain part of me that does want to play them, and if I'm in the right mood, I probably can have a lot of fun with them. But nonetheless, guys, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like. Let me know in the comments below, do you want more videos like this where we talk about a certain genre of game or certain kind of game? I wanted to try this, see if it works. If you guys enjoy it, let me know. And of course, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already, and join the family. And of course, have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and bye bye.